Janine, you want to record? All right, welcome to today's IL MathCom on Shift the Lift. We have been doing IL MathCom for a little over a year, and our goal has been to spread the joy and wonder of mathematics throughout Illinois, and we have had people from across the country and even a couple people from out of the country. So welcome again if you are coming back, or welcome if this is your first time. I am Heather Brown. I work with the State Board of Education through ISU, and Janine Shepard will be co-hosting. She's waving right there. Janine helps with our technical stuff. She is also a math and science content specialist. So if she's not talking, it's because she's busy making sure you're all okay. And then I will introduce to you a friend as well as a great colleague that I've worked with, Joanie Funderburk is now at Illustrative Mathematics. Joanie, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? And then you can go ahead and take off and get started.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, Heather and Janine, for inviting me. I'm really excited to spend some time with all of you today and learn together. I am a math educator this is my 30th year. I was a classroom teacher for about 20 years, and then I worked as a district level math coordinator for 6.5. And that was through the Common Core implementation. So I supported about 250 middle and high school math teachers as we transitioned to Common Core and the PARCC assessments. And then I got to go work at Student Achievement Partners. You might know their website, Achieve the Core. Did some great work with teacher leader groups across the country. And then about a year ago came to Illustrative Mathematics. I currently work with our facilitators. So we send folks out to train teachers who are new users of Illustrative Mathematics free OER math curriculum. And I help ensure that all those people have a really great experience. So I'm super excited to share with you. I've done this session on shifting the lift a couple of times. Most recently, I just did it at NCTM. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you and get this into present mode. And just hope that you can find a nugget or two here that helps you think differently and work more efficiently with your students in your classroom. So I want to start by just going through what my goals are. I want to be sure you think about identifying how and when you might be taking the cognitive lift from students. And this would apply too if there are some of you who work with, maybe you're a coach or you support other teachers, helping teachers realize when they're doing that. I believe that no teacher ever does this intentionally. By our well-meaning practices, we can accidentally do things that actually cause students to think less and us to think more. And then we'll spend some time talking about resources that will help you to shift the cognitive lift to students. And I'm hoping you'll leave with some really concrete, specific ideas for taking the work back. Brittany, I see your comment in the chat box, and people always ask, is it illustrative or illustrative? And we just say illustrative because that's how our founder, Bill McCollum, says it, but illustrative is perfectly fine too. So if you're saying it that way, don't feel like you have to change. So let's start by talking about knowing whether or not, or knowing how, I guess, we're maybe accidentally taking the cognitive lift away from students. So this is the comment I had before. I really just don't think that any teacher does this on purpose. I think that as a teacher, we want students to enjoy math, and we don't want them to struggle too much because struggling is not fun. But oftentimes in trying to create joy or trying to prevent struggle, we take the lift away from students. So I think one of the most important things is really thinking about what does it really look like when students are owning the cognitive lift? Because if we can name the specific things, the specific ways that we would see students engaging when they are owning the cognitive lift, then it's much easier to determine how much they are or aren't around those specific categories. So I have a couple of things that I want you to be able to look more closely at, and one of them is this card. So just in case this isn't very big on your screen and you're having a hard time seeing it, I'm going to put a link in the chat box to a shared folder, and you should just be able to click on that link. And in that folder, there are 3 different handouts plus a resource for you to look at after the call. I also put the that bit.ly link up at the top of this slide too. So you could, if you want to open up a separate window, you can do that and pull up this SERP card. This is handout 1, or if you want to just look at the screen, if you're able to see it big enough. But this is one of my favorite resources for helping really identify what does it look like when students are owning the cognitive lift in math class. So you'll see on the left column, these student vital actions. These are things that we want to be sure are happening every single day in your classroom. So are we seeing all students participate? Are we seeing students speak and not just say one sentence, but follow up with 2 sentences? Are they talking about each other's thinking and not just describing their own thinking? Are they revising their thinking? Are they looking for more ways to be more precise and using their academic language? There's a really important component for English language learners here, and then of course the point where we want students to engage and persevere. When you pull up the handout, you'll actually see this is meant to be copied as a 5x8 card. That's actually the name of this, the 5x8 card. And on the other side, it gives a little bit more in-depth description of each of these principles, which are in the right-hand column. So why is it important that each of these things be a part of our classroom? So I want to just pause for a second and allow each of you to reflect, either based on your own classroom practice if you're a teacher, or based on teachers that you work with or have observed, and see if you can look through these things and identify maybe one area where for you that's a strength, that's something you know you do really well, and maybe one area where you're like, I'm not sure that's always really happening consistently in my classroom. I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds of quiet time to look at that and think about one strength and one area for growth. If anybody felt comfortable sharing, you could type one of your strengths or one of your areas of growth into the chat box. Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. Kathy says that students talk about each other's thinking is one of the ones that she's thinking about. Laura is thinking about students persevere even when they're struggling. Kathy has a goal to get students talking about each other's thinking. And Brittany shared that her students currently revise their thinking with justification, but she'd like to increase their perseverance. So I encourage all of you to really self-reflect using that card or using another tool that really helps name what it looks like when students are owning the cognitive lift, because the more specific you can get about what you're looking for, the easier it is to make classroom changes that actually will result in that happening. So I encourage you to use that SERP card or another tool to set a goal for yourself. I do want to say too, I'm not sure if this will let me go back, but if you visit the website that the SERP card came from, and the link is both in the handout and on the previous slide, there's some really great resources. You can actually click on each of those student vital actions and get some specific teaching practices, even some classroom structures and routines that you can put into place to help you. So if there's one that you're like, wow, this is where my goal area is, this is something I want to work on, there are some specific teaching strategies that you can actually try tomorrow in your classroom. After you set your goal, I would also really encourage you to remember that success is not just a straight line, that by setting the goal and thinking this is something that I want to change, that's really the first step and an important first step. But give yourself permission to not be great at it right away, and understand that making these kinds of changes is going to be challenging for both you and your students. So just know that that path to success is going to be more like the scribbly line on the right than the straight line on the left. So I want to share with you, I think, 3 key ideas that you can take back that are quick and actionable to help you shift the cognitive lift to students in your classroom, or to help teachers that you work with to do that. So the 3 key ideas we're going to talk through on today's call are, first of all, go for the quick win. I'm going to talk about what that means in just a minute. Second, math is not a spectator sport. And third, the person talking about the math is the person learning the math. So I want to go through each of those individually really quickly. So this slide has just a little quick multiple choice question. I would love for you to read over these, select which answer you like, A through E, and type it, but don't press enter yet. Just type which one you think it is in the chat box. And let me say, full disclosure, I don't have scientific research to back this. This is just a really cool point that a principal I used to work with brought up, that sometimes when we think about trying to improve students' academic success, we get caught up in thinking about or trying to address maybe not the right things. So of these 5 things, which would you think is the biggest predictor of students' academic success? Do you think it is their reading scores from 3rd grade, their socioeconomic status, their parents' education level, their extracurricular involvement, or their previous academic success? So pick one of those 5, type it in the chat box, but don't hit enter until I tell you to. Now let me just say, all 5 of these are important, and all 5 of these there are studies to show that these impact students' success in school. So I'm not trying to suggest with my right answer that these other things aren't important. They definitely are. But everybody go ahead and press enter. I see Kathy's already popped in there. Awesome. I love how many of you selected E, previous academic success. And again, I wish I had some really great research. I might go dig for it, because I really strongly believe that previous academic success is the best predictor of future academic success. We just think about that in your own life. Like, you are much more likely to continue to pursue something if you're successful at it. When you're not successful at it, it's really easy to give up or feel frustrated. So I would challenge you that your students' desire to be successful in your class is based on their previous successes. So this is my thinking behind the philosophy of go for a quick win. If you start class with an activity that every student can be successful with, they're going to buy in from the very beginning of your class. If class starts with something that a student isn't able to feel success with, the likelihood that they're going to shut down and not cognitively engage from the very beginning of your class period is increased. So when I say go for the quick win, I mean start your class period with something that everyone can be successful at. So here's an example of that. This is a which one doesn't belong protocol. I would love for you to take a look at these 4 figures. And again, make your decision, type it in the chat box, but don't hit enter yet. I want you to decide, of these 4, which one do you think doesn't belong? And if you would add to your selection A, B, C, or D, just as a brief sentence or description as to why you think that one doesn't belong. So type it, but don't press enter yet. All right, go ahead and press enter and see the other responses you see from in the chat box. All right, I'm seeing a lot of you that selected D for different reasons. Some of you talked about it having white space or like 3 different colors. That's different. Inconsistent space in between the shapes. They're not all connected. Curves. It looks like there's some curves in there. All of those things are true. I also see a less frequent answer, B. B doesn't belong because it has no blue. Also true. A doesn't belong because it's all blue. Also true. So far we have A doesn't belong for a reason, B doesn't belong, and D doesn't belong. Can anyone come up with a reason why C might not belong with the other 4? Or the other 3, I should say. C, I see Joanna and Terry response. C has 2 colors. It's the only one that has 2 colors. Awesome. All right, well, you might even be able to come up with multiple reasons for any of these not belonging. I see some things about shape. I know when I've worked this activity with teachers in the past, they think about the number of sides in the polygons in each of the figures. That can be some differentiators. But the point is, there is a reason for each of these not belonging. So there isn't a correct answer. In fact, every answer is a correct answer. So by starting my class period with something like this, there's something for all students to engage and pay attention to, and every student is going to be right. So this is a way to go for a quick win at the beginning of your class. We want to be sure that every student feels like they have something to offer and that what they have to offer is valued. There are a couple other routines that you might have heard about. Have any of you already done a which one doesn't belong or seen that routine before? I'm seeing a few head nods out there. It is a great routine, and there's a nice website that has lots of those available, so you don't even have to think about them yourself. But there are some other routines or processes that you can use at the beginning of your class period that would also fall under the go for a quick win category, that would be accessible for all of your students and allow all of your students to engage. So I know some of you are familiar with the Illustrative Mathematics curriculum. I'm not here necessarily talking about that today, but that activity does come from the Illustrative Math curriculum, and that we also use Notice and Wonder opening routines, number talks. And another one that we don't use at IM, but that I really like, are the estimation 180 tasks. So I do have in that folder, the link that I shared earlier and that Heather popped in as well, a resource page that lists the direct websites to each of these if you want to get some ideas. And I'm sure you guys all know of some additional resources as well. Open Middle is one that just got typed into the chat box. Love that one too. So lots of opportunities. So I would love for you to just stop for a moment and think about how these opening routines or what other ones like them, how is it that these support students in owning the cognitive lift? And even, do you see any connections to the CERP card that we looked at earlier? And I would be happy for you to either type a response to this in the chat box, or if anybody wants to unmute and share a thought they have about these opening routines and shifting the lift. Kathy says all students participate. Yes, thank you, Kathy. Justify their own reasoning and the reasoning of others. All students participate. I revised my thinking in this. So yeah, seeing some of the connections to the CERP card. Students justifying and critiquing reasoning of others. Thanks, Kathy. Yes, language use for ELL students. Thanks, Brittany. Great. Well, thank you all for sharing. I hope you take some time to think about these other routines and starting your classes off with something that allows all of your students to have a quick win. So let's move on and talk about my second key idea, that math is not a spectator sport. I would just encourage you to think. I know when I reflect back on my own classroom experience with math, and even the very early years of my teaching career, well, maybe not even into the middle years of my teaching career, I was very much that kind of teacher that would stand up at the front of the room and show kids how to do the math, try to make it as easy for them as possible, maybe give them some clever mnemonic device or series of steps and ask them to take notes, writing down exactly what I was writing down, and then give them some practice problems. And that was how I taught. And I would get frustrated because I would spend, my whole class period giving these great notes and these amazing examples and helping my kids through some group practice. And then we'd come back the next day and they wouldn't understand the math concept at all. And it took me a long time to realize that I was the one doing all of the thinking at the front of the room, that I was the one making sense of the math at the front of the room. So I want you to think about something that you've learned deeply or well, and really consider what it took for you to learn that. Because I think we need to think about ensuring that our math classrooms have those same kinds of opportunities for students. I think it's a very rare student who's able to learn math well by watching a teacher do it. So I believe that this is an important key idea. Math is not a spectator sport, because to learn something, we actually have to do the thing. So that's really important. So at this point, we are going to move, as Heather mentioned at the beginning of the call, I'm going to ask you to move into breakout groups. I want to give you some careful instructions before we do. The thing that you're going to need to pull up in your breakout group is the thing that's in the folder labeled as handout number 2. Sorry, I have to like swing this over to get into the chat box.
I just put it back in the chat box, and I put handout number 2 on there for you, Jen.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. Perfect. Okay, so what you're going to see on handout number 2, the instructions are at the top of the handout, so you don't have to remember all of this, but I'm giving you 2 separate tasks, and it goes over 2 pages of the Google Docs, so you'll have to scroll down to see everything. But I would like, in your small breakout group, I would like you to look at the 2 tasks. Both are aligned to 7th grade to the ratio and proportional reasoning standards. So they're similar in their content, but the 2 tasks are really different. And I would like you to talk about the cognitive lift required by each task. Now, I want to back up and say, we haven't really talked about what we mean by cognitive lift, right? So we talked about what does it look like from the SERP card, but what are those things that make something more cognitively engaging versus less cognitively engaging? We haven't defined what that is, and I want to leave that kind of open-ended for your small breakout conversations. But I did put a couple of ideas about what you might want to think about as you're having those conversations, and some specific things that you can point to rather than just saying, oh, well, I think this one has more cognitive lift. You know, I don't want that to just be a gut reaction. I want you to be able to name, I think it has more cognitive lift because it requires students to do this or do that. Okay, so the instructions are at the top of handout number 2. Is there anybody who's having trouble getting to handout number 2? Because the breakouts are going to feel very different if you're not able to look at this handout while you're in there. Anybody having difficulty? You could either put in the chat or raise your hand. Okay, I'm guessing no news is good news.
So I'm just going to describe how breakouts are going to do. Janine has just randomly assigned you to rooms, and it's going to pop up and say, will you go to your breakout? And you just click OK. And then at the end of the time frame, it will give you a 1-minute warning or ask you to rejoin the main room. And if you don't rejoin quickly enough, then we can kind of just kick you all back into the main room. So those are kind of the things that'll happen. Yeah, I think those are all the things we need. Joanie, do you have anything else before we go ahead and split up?
Yeah, so I was just going to say we're going to give you 10 minutes to have this conversation. So look at these tasks and discuss the cognitive lift for 10 minutes. And when we come back, I'm going to ask that a few of you share out. So if in your group, you could decide who might share for your group and what are kind of the key points that were brought up in your conversation.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Joanna and Terry, are you able to select your breakout room?
I don't know how to make it project me. Sorry about that.
That's okay. For me, it was in the bottom left corner. It said, what did it say? It said like start video.
Start
Oh
video.
yeah, you're right. It went away. It's still dark. I don't have the video on, but I don't know what's going on.
All right.
Hello.
Yeah, it's based on your, as the host, I can see like some of your settings. So it says that you have your video on. So it's something with your computer.
So is there something blocking your camera?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all hooked to a smart board and an Elmo. So
Yeah, it's
I
just
can tell the
confused.
Elmo, but
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me tab over to look at these docs here.
Are we it?
Yes, it's the three of us.
Okay. All right, so we are looking in the Google Doc at the Shift the Lift tasks.
And we're looking at, there is 7 RP dueling candidates.
That's what the one I'm looking at now.
And comparing that to proportional relationships word problem.
Okay.
Independent practice worksheet.
So dueling candidates is definitely more open-ended.
Right.
Am I jumping too far ahead?
No, absolutely, you're great. Will students recognize the task as like other tasks that they've solved, or is the task a unique application of the math?
I think that one, the task is a more unique application of the math.
Mm-hmm.
We did do some other tasks that were similar to this one in particular in my 7th grade class. But it was, how is it possible that these two conflicting commercials are both making accurate claims about being like the leading brand? So they might have recognized it as being similar to that one for that reason. I know that's one connection I made, but no, it's not like the worksheet below it.
Right. One of the things that I hear a lot from teachers when we're looking at that uniqueness, right? Like that is when their students come across something that is completely different or very different, maybe not completely different, that feels different than what they've seen before, is that it makes them pause and like throw their hands up and be like, oh my gosh, I need you to help me get started. Like, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to enter this problem.
Right. And that's where my students get frustrated.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we as teachers, who typically don't like to see our students struggle, then enjoy putting tasks in front of them that look like task 2 because they're similar. They know that they're doing the same thing in each of these problems, right?
Right. They know that as soon as it hits their desk.
Right. They know the skill that they are supposed to be applying.
Mm-hmm.
And they know like they can just be little robots and solve each problem, right?
And they know if they're right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because they know if they struggled, it's probably wrong.
Or might be wrong, and it's that fear
right.
of being wrong, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All of which is not super constructive to creating independent thinkers and problem solvers.
Right. But does it engage them in the standards of mathematical practice? The first task, I would say it does engage them in several. They have to make sense of the problem and persevere in solving it. Construct viable arguments, critique the reasoning of these two fictitious other people, the situation mathematically, and I'm thinking that's probably it for the major ones. The second task, let's see.
Could we say they're making use of structure?
Yes.
That might be all.
Right.
And I don't think that's necessarily the way that we're supposed to be looking for structure, right?
And it's either structure or repeated reasoning from
Right.
seeing the same thing over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there should be precise.
Oh.
So attending to precision, maybe? But that's a stretch.
Right.
Okay, so let's see the next question. Does the task require students to justify their reasoning or solution? For the first one, yes. The second task, no. For multiple correct answers, there is for the first task and not for the second task. And do students have to make assumptions or inferences as they solve? I think yes for the first, but not for the latter.
I find it weird. Like in number 1, it says calculate the unit rate. They're not calculating anything. They're just pulling it out of the problem, right? Like
Right, that's why the other ones say find or identify.
Right, yeah. Like they're literally just circling numbers on this.
Or rewriting them somewhere else.
Right, right. Yeah, so I withdraw my claim that maybe they were engaging in deep structure and repeated reasoning, because now they're not even going to be thinking as they do this. They're just going to be
writing.
Yeah.
And this is supposedly aligned to the same standard? What is 7 RPA? Let's look, look that one back up.
We have about 3 minutes left, so we're good.
Yeah. Handy flip book here. Standard 7 RP1 is compute unit rates associated with ratios of fractions, including ratios of lengths, areas, and other quantities measured in like or different units. So I don't see that at all. Oh, maybe it's 7 RP2, which is recognize and represent proportional relationships between quantities. The sub-claim or substandard B is identify the constant of proportionality in tables, graphs, equations, diagrams, and verbal descriptions of proportional relationships. So that would be the worksheet.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing that for the first task. I don't know. I guess I'm not seeing the alignment for the first task.
Using proportional relationships to solve multi-step ratio and percent problems. Elizabeth, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, in general, obviously, you're going to get some wonderful conversation from the first task.
And a much deeper understanding coming from that, right?
Right. Well, because we've really been working, I'm at a gifted school, so they just want to give the answer really quickly. And we've been working really hard with them to get them to elaborate on their answers because they just want to jump to the answer.
Yeah.
And get them to write more about their answers and give better explanations, because that was a weakness that came out on our park testing. Was there, the logic and the reasoning pieces weren't being expressed, certainly during the park test. So that would be a fabulous way to continue to build that, that skill of being able to elaborate on your answers.
All right, I'm getting a message that we're ready to go back to the main room. We can keep talking for 60 seconds.
Well, I guess we were supposed to decide who's going to be our speaker.
Not me.
All right, that leaves me. What are we? All right, so we just said that task 1 is obviously much more of a cognitive lift in task 1.
Right. That mainly they could complete task 2 without thinking, right?
Yes, with only circling.
Yes.
Okay.
Until we ask people to share out, that would be great. All right. Joanie,
All right, do we have everybody back?
I think so.
Awesome. Well, I was in breakout room 1, and I asked Kathy if she would share some of the ideas from our group. So Kathy, would you share?
Okay, so we talked about, did everyone have the same task? Were we all looking at the same things? Okay, so
Yeah.
Our group talked about task 2 definitely having a lower cognitive demand, and there is value in that. Joanie talked about, if our goal was to, I think it was proportional reasoning and constant proportionality, certainly we want to give students the opportunity to apply those concepts. However, the first task had a much higher cognitive demand, and it would give us more and different various information about students. There was no values given about how many votes, what the total votes were. Students had to really jump into that problem. And I was saying it reminded me of Dan Meyer's math headache, how you give students a problem that they don't really know how to solve. And I was saying that our math team in particular in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, especially the 6th grade one that I'm on, we've really changed a lot in the last year and a half. We did a lot of direct teaching before, and last year we started dabbling in giving the math headache at the beginning of our topic, and we were so energized by what was starting to happen in our classrooms. It really has transformed what we're doing today.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
How about somebody from breakout room 2?
I can go. We agreed with most of the same comments that task 1 was really much more open and really demanded the students to talk about their inferences. And students didn't even realize, I think, before they look at problems like this, they don't even realize how many times they do make inferences when they're trying to solve problems, and how much that can change their perspective and their ability to actually do the math. So I think it was, I think these are really good. I think it generally, they can learn so much from each other just by listening to what everybody was thinking. And in task 2, it doesn't promote that as much. I mean, it pretty much is, this is what I did, and then I divided both sides, or then I multiplied both sides, or whatever. It really just talks about the procedure. Whereas task 1 really gets more to the combination of the procedure. You have to use the procedure to get an answer, but it's really more the reasoning, which is what we really do in the adult world.
Thank you, Kathy. How about breakout room 3?
We were breakout room 3. We discussed how great it would be to have connections between this and social studies, and like the idea of electoral college. Like, this is exactly this is an electoral college is what one of them's trying to argue, and one of them's trying to argue popular vote. So we kind of made those connections. Other than that, we basically said the same thing. We made a note on the second one that they're doing the exact same thing 5 times. So after the first one, there's no cognitive need after the first item. So we kind of commented on that.
Great, thank you. Did we have a 4th breakout room, or did we just have 3?
I was from
4?
breakout room 4.
Sure.
We talked about the first problem being really open-ended with a greater cognitive lift. It was aligned to a majority of the standards of mathematical practice. It was open-ended. There were multiple correct answers depending on their justification. And the other problem, we talked about having no cognitive lift because they weren't even, at one point it said to calculate the unit rate, and they're not even calculating anything. They're just finding it, locating the only number in the problem and rewriting it as their answer. So it didn't even have a real procedure other than restating the one number that existed in the context of the problem. So the first one definitely had a much greater cognitive lift to it.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I hope you all had good conversations. It sounds like from your highlights, you all had some good conversations in your breakout rooms. I just want to add a couple of general comments. I don't want to give the impression that we should always be doing tasks like task number 1 in our classroom, that we should always be thinking about giving kids things with a high cognitive lift, because I like to make the analogy when I was in the classroom with my students of working out or trying to get in shape or build your muscles. Like, you don't lift heavy muscle every single day, day after day after day. If you do that, you're going to exhaust your muscles and overtrain, and that's not going to go well. But you have to do it sometimes and when it's appropriate. And so really thinking about, there's a role for the kind of worksheet type like task 2, where we're just identifying, that worksheet would tell me really well if students understand what the constant of proportionality is from an equation. It doesn't tell me if they understand proportional relationships or some of the other things that the first task will tell me, but there is some value in the information that I'll get even from tasks with a low cognitive lift. So I think what's really important is recognizing what your learning goals are, and then how heavy a lift should it be to ensure that you reach those learning goals. So I just wanted to be sure I said that. And then the other thing that came up in my breakout room that I would imagine others of you probably talked about as well or deal with as well is that this isn't easy to do. So even as a teacher, when I want to make these kinds of changes, it has to be a slow and gradual process and something that I do bit by bit rather than trying to change overnight. And also recognize that this can be really challenging for our students. They come through school being used to being told, spoon-fed, and not having to lift necessarily. So supporting them as you move to these new kinds of classroom practices is really important too. And I would recommend, I personally think the standards for math practice are a nice way to help kids frame shifting the lift to them. Okay, I don't want to rush that conversation too much, but I do want to move on, so I'm sure we get through the next part too. I hope that you, in your conversations, you saw some connections there to the SERP card and really how a rich task can help students in shifting the lift. So the last point I want to make, whoops, and I'm going the wrong way in my slide deck, but actually let me escape and go back, because that little girl is just the cutest thing, and we want to look at her for another minute. So as we think about language, I want to encourage you to think about language in your own classroom compared to how babies develop language. When you think about a baby, we know they can understand language long before they can actually speak a word themselves, and definitely before they can read and write. So that's how our language develops. We first understand, then we figure out how to speak, and then we figure out how to read and write. So thinking about following that same idea with mathematical language and asking your students to be verbal in math class. Are you going through that same process where you're giving them the opportunity to understand, and before they speak, and to speak before they read and write. It can just make a huge difference. So another one of the resources that's in that folder that I shared with you is some work out of Stanford University. They did this specifically, this study. We're coming up with what they call math language routines. These are for supporting English language learners. But I think what you'll find is these are great at supporting language development for all students. So these are 8 math language routines, and the handout I shared with you describes all of them in more detail and ways that you can implement them in your classroom, either to support English language learners or to support all students. But I would like for us to try to model one here on the call. So we're going to try the one that is called Stronger and Clearer Each Time. So I would love for you to just, on a piece of scrap paper in front of you or on another Google Doc or whatever you have access to, please write down your thoughts about this prompt. What makes a math task cognitively engaging? And I'm just going to give you 30 seconds or so to jot some ideas down. It's way too little time, but just quickly. Okay, so in just a minute, I'm going to ask Janine to put us into breakout rooms again. I know I didn't give you enough time. And in between now and then, I want you to just take about another 10 seconds, 15 seconds to read through what you wrote and think about how you're going to share this with somebody else. What are you going to say to help somebody else understand? I'm going to ask Janine to put you in a breakout room with one other person, and each of you is going to share your response to the prompt. Be sure that both people get the opportunity to talk, because you're only going to be in there for about 2 to 3 minutes. And then if you have time and you've both shared, you can ask some clarifying questions or have some conversation about it, but it's okay if all you do is share one with the other and that's it. And then I don't know how this is going to work, Janine, but let's see if we can try to do a second breakout room with a second random partner as well. So everybody will have the opportunity to share their thinking on this prompt twice. Okay? And then we'll come back to the whole group for step number 5.
Am I on? Hello?
I can hear you, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Brittany, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I stepped away for just a second, and now I'm trying to get caught up.
You're all right. I just realized I don't have the visual anymore. So we're talking about which of those makes it cognitively demanding?
Yes. I put that it contained a productive struggle, and there were multiple correct answers.
Okay, I misunderstood so we were doing the steps. I thought we were looking at the 5 steps and then saying which ones were where was the cognitive demand coming from? I was listening and setting up the breakout rooms at the same time.
Oh. Multitasking.
Right?
I was doing it too. So yeah, this is
all right.
My bad. But.
Yeah, the open-endedness. Like, I love the fact that the students were going to, they were going to hypothetically invent their own numbers and to try to test their idea. And then they were going to have different results than the person next to them. And so there was going to be natural discourse from engaging in that first task. And they were going to have to compare and contrast.
Yes, I like that, the natural discourse.
All right, we're supposed to switch. I think I have to close the rooms and then reopen.
Are we doing a second switch?
So you have to close and reopen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's not super fluent.
All right. You want us to go to another room, Joanie?
Yeah, you know what? I think we're going to be a little short on time. So let's just kind of pretend we went to a second part. Plus, I see we're losing people too, so I don't want to belabor that one too much. But I'm going to go back to a quick screen share to finish out this routine. You would then, well, imagine that you had the chance to share with another person, and then based on your 2 share outs, you go back to your original writing and make revisions. I know Kathy and I had a short conversation, but I got some great ideas from her that I would change and add to what I thought. So this is just one of the math language routines that you can find in that study from Stanford, and ties back to my comment earlier too. Right? This is hard when we ask students to change to this kind of classroom behavior as well. So providing some support structures that allow them to engage and get used to it can be really powerful. And I think this just makes the point that the person talking about the math is the person learning the math. So the more often we can get kids thinking, the better off they're going to be. So again, I would encourage you to reflect back on how this connects to the CERP card. I think you definitely can see some language things in that card that are really connected and related to what we know is important for students in learning mathematics. And of course, the Standards for Math Practice have a lot about language as well. So just a couple of images to wrap up. Just remind yourself that it's a process and change takes time. And really try to not get discouraged because it is slow, but it doesn't get faster if you quit. And this maybe I'll just let you explore after the call. I really love in NCTM's Principles to Actions book, they have these unproductive beliefs, and then they counter them with productive beliefs that sort of help us undo some of the negative thinking. So I came up with a couple of unhelpful assumptions from my own teaching practice and from teachers that I've worked with, that I believe these are some things that get in the way of helping to shift the cognitive lift to students. So let me give you just a minute to read these, and then we'll see if we can shift our heads a little bit and turn these into some productive beliefs.
The one in the middle is the one that I struggle with.
All right, so I'm going to suggest, and again, I don't have the right answers. These are just some things that I would challenge you to think about and to redefine your thinking. I did used to totally believe it was my job to make math easy for students. That was always my goal. When students said my class was easy, I thought I had won, and I realize now that that's not the case. That learning includes challenge and struggle, and helping kids understand that will go a long way towards helping them shift the lift, helping you shift the lift to them in your classroom. Classroom routines and structures can help engage students in productive mathematical talk, and that can help them from getting off task while you're wanting them to talk. Yeah, this idea of learning procedures before you can engage with concepts, that's a deep-seated one, because most of us learned that way, but there's actually a lot of research to show that students can and should engage with ideas before formalizing them. Personally, I don't think any of you would be on the call if you believed that your students didn't care. I don't. I think all students want to be successful. And the time is a very real issue, but taking the time to do fewer things more deeply goes a lot longer and a lot further in students' understanding than just covering things quickly. So just to sum up, my 3 key ideas are: go for the quick win. So start your class period with something that all your students can be successful with. Math is not a spectator sport. Be sure you're not doing all of the thinking for them. And the person talking about the math is the person learning the math. So get your students talking, even with some structures and routines that will help do that productively. And then just one of my favorite proverbs and reminders that obstacles do not block the path, they are the path. Be sure you check out the resources that's in that folder that I shared with you. These are all hot links, so you can quickly jump into any of those and try using them out in your own classroom. And that's all I have for you today. And thank you so much for giving me some of your time and sharing your ideas and thinking with me today.
Thank you so much, Joanie, for sharing all your ideas. And you are amazing at doing the online thing. You're like on top of it. As I've posted a few times, as some people have left a little bit early, please take this time to answer the questions in our post survey. It is what helps us inform our next sessions. It also is going to be what decides whether or not we have any summer sessions, for those of you who may or may not be interested in waiting until the fall to continue. And it provides both Joanie and us feedback on what we can do to improve in the future. So please take the time to fill out the survey. I'm going to say that a whole bunch of times. Even if you are watching the recording, please take the time to fill out the post survey. It is what allows us, this data is what allows us to continue to offer this opportunity. So thank you all. I hope you're having a great end to the school year, and we will see you at our next IL MathCom. Thanks.